Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our panel on healthy aging. We will all be presenting our slides, and then we will make sure we leave plenty of time for question and answers. So I'm going to go straight to my slides. So this is the Healthy Aging panel. I'm Dr. Masaki. I'm the chair of the Department of Geriatric Medicine at the John A. Burns School of Medicine. Dr. Colette Browne is an emeritus professor at the Thompson School of Social Work. Dr. Virginia Hinshaw is chancellor and professor emeritus. And Susie Chun Oakland is with Catholic Charities, and she's a retired Hawaii state senator and representative. So I'm very honored to have this wonderful group of ladies speaking today. These are today's topics. We'll be talking about aging in the United States and the geriatrics approach to care, a little bit about women and healthy aging, the positive effects of aging, and then senior centers to promote active aging and independence. So I'm going to start out with this question. What is geriatrics? And I'm going to answer it with this cartoon. The older gentleman says, Judy, do you see that elderly couple down at the other end of the counter? And she says, yeah, what about them? And he says, I was just thinking that's probably what you and I will look like in about 10 years or so. And she says, you do realize that's a mirror at the end of the counter, don't you? So I always say geriatrics is 10 years older than you are right at this moment. But getting serious, geriatrics is the care of older patients. And traditionally, this age was set at 65 years and older. Now, remember, this age cutoff was set in the 1930s. This is when Social Security first came into being. And we know that at that time, not too many people lived to be 65. So at that time, they said, if you live to the extreme old age of 65, we will reward you with Social Security. And later, Medicare came in as well with that age. Now we know 65 years is certainly not very old. In fact, in my group, among geriatricians, we say somebody who's 65 and healthy, we call that pediatrics. We don't think that they really need a geriatrician. Currently, geriatrics is a critical shortage specialty. It's actually a federally designated critical shortage specialty. They've estimated that there are 30,000 geriatricians needed in the US right now. We have less than 7,000. And while the number of older people is going up, the number of geriatricians is actually decreasing every year. So for many practical reasons, geriatrics is currently mostly care of the very frail elderly. We don't take care of mostly people in their 60s. We take care of people in their 80s and 90s and even beyond, or people of any age who have a lot of frailty or who have dementia. That's one of the things we specialize in. Why is it important? Well, this is life expectancy at birth over the last century. So if you look at the year 1900, that's here, this is men and this is women. It was not uncommon to have people die in their 30s and 40s. In fact, life expectancy then was for men about 47 and for women a little over 50 years. So people didn't live very long. Now, if you fast forward to 2000, in that 100 years, not quite doubled, but certainly a huge leap forward, right? 74 for men and then about 80 for women. And then here we are at 2020, and this increase in life expectancy is projected to continue through 2050. So you can see here it's about 75, about 82 for women. You notice at all points in time, women have tended to outlive men. So this is the US older population, and here on this x-axis, we have time. So this starts out with 1900 and goes all the way here. We're right about here in the 1920s, and this is projected out to 2050. And you can see this blue line here is people over the age of 65. So you can see a very steady growth over the century. And then here around 2010, you can see this curve actually got steeper. And this is when the baby boomers hit 65. And you can see that for about 20 years, this is going to be a steeper rise, and then it'll level out again. This green line on the bottom is people over the age of 85. So not only are more people living into to older ages, 65 and older, it's way more into 85 and older. In fact, the 85 and older population is the fastest growing segment of the population and has been for the last several decades. Where does Hawaii stand? Well, I was actually surprised to see this, but until the mid-1990s, Hawaii's percentage of older population was actually lower than the national average. We have the state of Hawaii in orange and the United States in this magenta purple color. And you can see somewhere in the mid-90s, that's when we switched, and then Hawaii became higher than the national average. And now we are certainly growing at a much faster rate. And currently, Hawaii has the highest life expectancy of all states in the United States. A lot of this is because of our different ethnic groups, many of our Asian groups. So again, here red is women and blue is men. And Chinese women in particular live a very, very, very long time. And then Japanese is close behind, then other than Filipino. Caucasians, in most studies on the mainland, Caucasians tend to have the highest life expectancy. In Hawaii, they actually have one of the lower life expectancies because many of the Asian populations have a higher life expectancy. Unfortunately, there's still health disparities, and Native Hawaiians do have the lowest life expectancy, and that's a lot of work that needs to be done to try and even that score. So again, in every ethnic group and at every point in time, women have outlived men. So women, we're starting to feel pretty good, right? But it's not all our way. So men, there's some good news for you too. When we look at physical disability over the age of 70, you can see women who are in red, 30% of them will have, almost 30% will have a disability after the age of 70 compared to only 20% of men. So even though women live longer, we're also more likely to be frail. Here, this is disability and activities of daily living. This is things like bathing and dressing and grooming, things we do all the time. Again, women more than men. And these are the instrumental activities of daily living. This is things like taking your medications, balancing your checkbook, cooking, cleaning, that kind of thing. Again, women tend to have more disability than men do. So these are some of the characteristics of aging. Older people, unfortunately, are more susceptible to disease. But it's not only genetics. Environmental factors are also an influence on the rate of aging. So the things we do matter. It's not just our genes. There is a lot of variability among the older population. So if we take a group of 80-year-olds and compare anything, heart function, lung function, kidney function, we'll have all ends of the spectrum. We'll have some who are completely normal and then some who have very bad disability and everything in between. Not so much when we do younger populations. And the ability to maintain what we call homeostasis. This is sort of keeping balance. This is when you go outside and it's very hot and you're sweating and you're losing liquids and then you drink to rehydrate yourself. That's your body taking care of itself to maintain this balance or homeostasis. In older people, this ability is not as good as it was when they were younger. We also see atypical presentations in older people. So I always say geriatrician is a little bit like a detective. It's not clear sometimes exactly what's happening. Sometimes older patients will just present with a functional decline. They'll have falls or confusion or weight loss or incontinence, but you're really not sure what's going on. Is it pneumonia? Is it a heart attack? It could be a bunch of different things. We see misleading symptoms. We see patients with a rip-roaring pneumonia. Pneumonia is a bad infection of the lungs, but they don't have a fever. Why is that? Because the body cannot mount that fever. And sometimes we have no presenting symptoms. So patients can have a heart attack or a stroke and have no symptoms at all. We find out later on when we do an EKG or when we do a CAT scan that, oh, something must have happened before they had an event. We see these extremes. This is Mr. Chuck Yogi, who belonged to one of our studies at Kokini Medical Center, the Honolulu Heart Program. He used to run marathons at the age of 89. He was probably fitter at 89 than I've been in my entire life. And then on the other side, we have this older gentleman who has trouble walking across the street and needs help. So we see the extremes. The geriatric approach to care is different. We focus on the whole person, not just on organ systems. We look at all domains. We look at the whole person, physical, cognitive, psychological, and social domains. And our goal is really to enhance independence and quality of life. Because when we ask older people, what do you want for yourself when you're older? That's what they really want. We try and do preventive care, early rehabilitation if possible. Sometimes at the end of life, palliative care is necessary. And we do this with a whole interdisciplinary team. It's not impossible for one health profession to take care of these older patients. We really need the whole team approach. I labeled this maintaining brain health, but I want to say this is maintaining any health in old age. We know that if you stay physically active, socially active, mentally active, and have good nutrition, and do this through your whole life, not just when you reach old age, but through your whole life, and reducing the risk factors for heart disease, this will not only be good for your heart, but also for your brain. So we know that doing these things will help you have a lower risk of developing dementia and other debilitating conditions. And it's good for your entire body. So in summary then, for all practical purposes, aging is a loss of the body's reserve capacity, but normal aging does not interfere with daily activities. With age, though, there are more risks and exposure and therefore more chance of having disease. And our health habits over a lifetime can really influence our health. So all of us need to start working on this, not just when we are older, but also when we're young. I also say, let's not stereotype people. Look at this lady here. I don't think I could have done this even when I was young. And then we have another one who's in a wheelchair who can't even stand. So again, we want to embrace all aspects of aging and keep ourselves as healthy as possible, as long as possible. The Johnny Burns School of Medicine has a mini medical school on healthy aging for seniors in the community. We have sessions every spring and fall. It's usually 5 consecutive Saturdays. And if this is something you might be interested in, I've listed our website here, and you can also send an email saying that you're interested so we can send you an invitation for our next session, which is going to be in the spring of 2022. With that, I'm going to thank you, and I'm going to stop my share, and I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who's Dr. Colette Browne. She recently retired, and she's Emeritus Professor at the School of Social Work. Colette?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Masaki. Nice to see you. My grandmother lived to be 97 years old. She'd actually hoped to live to 100. But her life was challenged. And so I think her lifespan was actually pretty impressive. Her life story was one of limited education, missing and then an abusive husband, multiple children, and economic strife throughout her life. As a clinician and academic researcher, I've spent the last 35 years or so talking to people like my grandmother and other older men and women. Topics like the aging process, how we feel about aging, how we feel about the aging of others, how aging is viewed differently by different populations, what are the most pressing concerns, what's the role of policy in healthcare. All of this was great interest to me and remains so. What I've come to learn, and now about myself as well, as I am also older, that for men and women, what everyone wants is the same, and that's comfort, security, and dignity. If we could have slide 2. This talk, though, is about women because the truth is comfort, security, and dignity. It's really hard for women as they get older to reach these. And why is that? When I think about my own grandmothers, one lived a long life and the other died earlier from cancer. Both had challenges, but very different ones. What I've learned from my work and what has been validated by research is that older women, in fact, do have some very real concerns. So our focus today, even though men and women both age, our focus will be on older women. Now, in every nation, women live longer than men. In most mammal species, also, women live longer. Girls live older even to the first year of age, and there truly is some type of female survival advantage. But there's much that we have to learn still from biology. But I'm not a biologist, so I'm going to talk more from a demographic and more from a social science perspective. In the US alone, there are more older women than older men by 6 million. About 70% of the 85 and over population are women. But there's also some advantages to living longer. We all know that. Besides longevity, women have stronger social networks. They keep their networks, their social relationships, their friends closer. And we're learning how important that is to not be socially isolated. But there's disadvantages too. Income, healthcare, the absence of long-term care services, and of course, the fact that women are primarily caregivers. Now, I think you'd probably agree with me that there's nothing wrong with caregiving. The problem is when it impacts our health and our economic status, and when it leaves women especially vulnerable to service gaps. Now, before I focus more on our topic today for the next 5 minutes or so, just a real quick caveat, and that is that what we've learned about sex and aging and gender and aging are really undeveloped topics. And we've also learned that gender is not so much a binary, but it's complicated, it's a spectrum. Our research isn't up to date yet, but I'm very optimistic it will be more inclusive in the future. What we're seeing then is that there are gender inequities that shape opportunities from birth until we die. Could we have slide 3? So this focus is on gender and aging, and it's also the one on inequality. Now, there's a framework that gerontologists and others often use, and it's called life course. And this really just speaks to that long view of aging, that we don't become old on our 65th, our 65th, our 70th birthday, but rather it's a process. That what happens in our earlier years very much impacts what happens when we're older. And of course, it isn't just our own life history, but it's what's happening around us. And if we did not understand that concept with COVID-19, we certainly now do understand how what's happening outside of us so much impacts our life. If we can have the next slide. Now, I think what's really interesting and also alarming, quite frankly, is if you look at the global picture, is that gender inequality exists in every country. There is no country where women now are equal to men in various aspects of health and education, political influence, and so forth. So reports from the World Bank, the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the World Economic Forum, major reports that look at global pictures of women really are, as I just said, alarming. Women continue to have less income and be paid less than men. The economic gap, according to the World Economic Forum, will take another 200 years to close. That there is some improved gender parity in education, but not in political power. And certainly we see some improvements in our country, but we still have a ways to go. The family remains the domain with the most persistent gender roles, and discrimination and violence against women exists in every nation, and sadly is on the rise in those with growing conservative movements, for example, Spain, France, Turkey, and Russia. If we can have the next slide. So what I wanted to do was to talk about income. Now, I think all of you would probably agree with me that income alone does not make a happy life, but we also know that without an adequate income, our opportunity for access to healthcare, to decent housing, to transportation, to nutrition nutritional food, all of things that Dr. Misaki talked about that were so important are very, very difficult to do when there really isn't adequate income. So what I wanted to do now is just take a minute or so to look at the economic status of older women and men here in Hawaii. So we'll leave that global picture and really take a look more at Hawaii. And if we can have the next slide. This is from the United States Census data, the American Community Survey data that looks strictly at Hawaii. And this was from about 2015. And of course, the most glaring thing that you see is that in terms of circles, women's average annual income is much less than men's average income. You also see from here that Social Security is the most common source of income for men and women. So again, hence the importance of Social Security. But what you can also see here, if you look at pensions, retirement savings, the fewer women than men have income from pensions and private savings. And when they do, it's quite a bit less. Now, this gets really interesting if we can have the next slide, when we start to look at adding in race to the picture. So this actually was one of the few studies that looked at not only older adults, but by gender and also by race. And this is also pretty alarming. This is a bar graph. The green are women and the gray is men. And what you see here is for every race and ethnic group here in Hawaii, women have a greater chance or more at risk for poverty than men are. But you'll see that certain groups are more at risk. And this is good to know, so it helps us target on a policy level where we should provide our intention. So while women are more poor than men, regardless, we see certain populations, other Asian populations, Chinese and Hispanic, really more at risk for poverty than groups on the other end of the bar graph, Filipino, Japanese, white, and even Native Hawaiian. So again, the importance of what researchers discuss as the disaggregation of data, the separation of data, so we can really understand it a great deal more. If we can have the next slide. So in quick summary, what we know globally and what we know in Hawaii is that there are multiple barriers that exist to reach women's equality. That when women do achieve their full potential, it's not only women, but society's benefit. In Hawaii, older women are more economically insecure, and the economic insecurity for older women means insecurity, but also a real policy opportunity for us. And remember, when we return back to that lifespan and life course perspective, what we know is that that income gap, unfortunately, becomes the retirement gap for too many older men and women, but especially women. We can have the next slide. So the gender gap, as I just said, leads to the retirement gap. And what we're looking at are trying to prevent today's younger women from becoming what we see now in our data. So we want to eliminate that gender wage gap. We want to look at the unequal distribution of care responsibilities, the high cost and unavailability of elder and child care. And we're hoping that the present administration is going to do something about this. Discrimination and gender-based violence and limited affordable housing. You know, what a difference it would make to younger women who are only tomorrow's older women if all of these things were addressed. But midlife and older women also face limited job opportunities, occupational segregation, poor health, and again, that issue of long-term services that keeps coming up, and gender-based violence, again, the increase in elder abuse, especially against older women. And all of these are barriers when you put them all together for secure old age for women. The lack of family policy funding and options, again, healthcare and long-term care, that policy inertia that we so much do not pay attention to issues related to older women. President Biden's new commission on gender equity, which just came out yesterday, I believe. It's an excellent report, but there's very little information on older women. I urge you to read it. And the lack of safety at home, in the community, and at work. Next slide. So, you know, my grandson, every time I ask him what we should do, he always says, "What the heck?" So I felt like really saying, rather than what we can all do, what the heck? What do we do with all this information? Well, I think the most important thing that we've learned is the vote. Support those who believe women matter and ask those questions and make sure that they believe that. To advocate for a just vision for society. This should go for everyone. We should be respectful of cultural and gender variations. What about better legislation to increase gender and end the pay gap? You know, we're one of the few countries that really doesn't do things like even making income transparent, and how important that would be. How do you know if you're underpaid if that is not made available to you? Support for older women. It kind of drives me crazy, to be honest, when I see reports about gender equality and there's no mention of protection of Social Security or the issue of long-term care. These are critical issues for everyone, but especially older women. Ending all forms of gender-based violence. Again, elder abuse against women is gender-based violence. And proportionate gender care, child and elder care. You know, we're one of only 6 countries that don't allow child and elder care leave and affordable child care. You know, we really have to change this if we want women back in the workforce. Again, COVID has really highlighted, hasn't it, what's happening with women here. And lastly, I think be a mentor and be mentored. Young people are fabulous. They are, my daughters are always correcting me with some ideas I have, which no longer should be ideas that I have in my head. So listen to younger people, listen to their concerns about the environment, about climate change, about gender roles, about social justice, about race issues. They have a great, great deal, I think, to talk to us about. Next one. I wanted to end actually with just a quick 3-sentence poem, which I really just love, if I may, before I turn it over to Dr. Hinshaw. This is from the poet Aaron Van Buren. And he said this, and I just thought this was quite meaningful. He said, there are 4 things in life that will change you: love, music, art, and loss. He said the first 3, love, music, and art, will keep you wild and full of passion. He said, but it's the last one, loss, that may allow you to be brave. So thank you so much for being with me here today. And I'm going to introduce Dr. Hinshaw, turn it over to her, and I know you'll have a treat listening to her. Dr. Hinshaw?
Okay. Well, aloha. I'm delighted to join y'all this evening. And I chose the topic, positive effects of aging, because I really believe that's true. But unfortunately, that's not what you hear a lot about. There are a lot of negative messages, misery myths, I call those, where we'll be feeble, confused, unhappy, lonely, useless, and the list goes on. And we hear it in the social media and the press. But I'm here today to give you some information that I think counters a good bit of this. I'm going to review findings that support the positive effects of aging based on research, discuss physical changes that actually improve our lives, and emphasize the importance of attitude. Now, aging, first of all, is not a disease. Aging is a natural and universal process. We do it from the day we're born. Now, diseases are deviations from the normal state, and I will talk somewhat about that because we face that as we age, as Kamal mentioned. But I like what Maxine has to say. She says, don't get all weird about getting older. Our age is merely the number of years the world has been enjoying us. So keep that in mind at all times. Now let's talk a little bit about perception versus reality. And these are based on research studies, and there are a number of them. I'm just going to give you a couple of examples. But perception can be very different from reality, and particularly in regard to aging. Look at all the negative stereotypes: our memory loss, can't drive, sick, inactive, sadness, all these lists of negative stereotypes for aging. And then let's look at who expects that. The 18 to 64-year-olds, they actually expect a lot of that to happen when they turn 65. That is their expectation. Then let's ask the experts, the experience of people who are 65 and over. And it's a totally different picture here. Now, there are certain times we do have these, so it's not zero. But look at the difference, like 57% to 25%. The experts, people who are living at 65 and over, they have a very different reality. And I think that's really important. Perception does not match reality. And in another study, they looked at who was thriving. And I love that term, thriving. And they asked different age groups. And the 65 plus, that's the one on the bottom here, at the bottom of each section. But look, social, community, financial, physical, we're all thriving more than any of the other groups in every category. We're listing people 65 and over and say they are thriving. Now that's not 100%, as we know, but clearly the majority are doing that. And when you get to the physical, it gets a little bit closer. And that's kind of to be expected in a lot of ways, because one of the things that happens as we age, we have to deal with change. And aging does require us to transition through many changes. Some we like, some we don't. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the fears that I've heard and concerns from people over the years. And certainly two of the major ones is having declining mental activities or abilities, and that's the brain. Also having increasing health challenges for the body. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those two aspects. Now, there's good news about the brain, the transition of an aging brain. The brain continually resculpts itself in response to experience and learning. That's a reason you need to be a lifelong learner and also have lots of experiences that stimulate your brain. You also get new brain cells all the time. It doesn't stop when you're 20. Throughout your life, you will be generating new brain cells. An important one is the emotional circuitry. It matures and becomes more balanced with age. And that's partly because we're using both sides of our brains, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But that's very notable in scans. This is all documented. It's not just opinion. They looked at these issues. And so actually there's good news about our brains. Oopsie. Okay, I want to talk about a young brain versus an old brain. A young brain looks kind of like this tree over here without many branches or leaves because they haven't had much experience or learning. Now they can get to an answer really fast because, did my picture go away? Oops, okay. They can get there really fast because they don't have to make many connections. And then look at this beautiful older brain over here. This one, oh, start my video. Did I go off? Okay. This is a beautiful brain. This is an old brain. Lots of leaves, lots of branches. Now it's pretty full, kind of like a hard drive that's gotten full. So it takes us longer to get connected. We have to go through lots of connections to find the answer to something. And so that can take us a little longer, but the good news is we get there. And that's what you should keep in mind. It's actually, what you're doing is building wisdom. That's what that old brain has from experience and learning. Now about using both hemispheres of your brain, the left brain versus the right brain, we hear a lot about that. The left brain is the logical, mathematical side, and typically deals with those type of activities. The right brain is creative, intuitive. And what happens as we age is we start going back and forth more. And that helps us develop compassion because we see more sides of issues. And we're bringing in our feeling side as well as our analytical side. In addition, musicians have even better brains because their corpus callosum, which attaches these two, is larger than most people. So it's developing skills. They're going back and forth all the time. Now, there is one area of the brain, the amygdala, which decreases in activity as we age. Little two glands, groups of cells in the back of your brain. But that's actually good because it's the center of fear, anger, and hatred. So as we age, that goes down in activity. So we mellow. And we increasingly react to the positive more than the negative. So these are actually beneficial changes in our brains as we age. Now, health challenges. I said I'd talk a little bit about disease, and I'll use myself as an example. When I first started out, I looked like this card. You know, no dents, no damage, looks really great. Now, after 77 years, I look a little bit more like this on occasion. I've been using the equipment longer, and so therefore I need a lot more repairs and maintenance. And that is a common situation for us as we age. And most of us have what I call the list of ailments. So this is a short list of mine. I'm not a paragon of health. I had wonderful parents who had some not so wonderful diseases. So I deal with all these, but I really think this is where you talk about attitude. And I like this woman's attitude where she just goes, got to move on. Can't spend all your time on this list. So what about attitude? The remarkable thing is we have a choice every day regarding the attitude we will embrace for that day. No one else determines that. We do. And that's important. And I love this is my lovely granddaughter, Audrey Virginia. And she always tells me, have a lovely day. And my response is, I'll make it a lovely day. Because sometimes you have to make it a lovely day. It has its challenges and problems, but going about making it a lovely day. And I have a little visualization that I do to help me in that way. And when I start having negative thoughts, and it can be a variety of issues, being a cancer survivor, whatever it might be on your minds, it's negative. And in my head, I have this box where this little gnarly creature sits. And when I start having those thoughts, what happens is that little creature starts coming out of the box. And so what I do is I reach up and slap the type down and say, I'm not going there. I am not going to spend my time and energy that I have on those thoughts. And it really helps me in a lot of situations. And it's just a visualization I came up with thinking about how to control my own thinking and not return to negative thoughts. And I like what the Dalai Lama said, the purpose of our lives is to be happy. And these people are laughing, and they're in the mini med school that Kamal mentioned on healthy aging. And laughter is really good for you. Laughter is the best medicine. It will induce endorphins, and those are the feel-good hormones that runners get. And I don't run, so I have to laugh. It lowers increases your circulation. It lowers cortisol, the stress hormone, induces natural killer cells to help you fight off infections. And it's just a wonderful way to express yourself and enjoy. Laughter is really, really healthy. So I encourage people to laugh at least once every day. And I can't think of many days that I haven't, even on some of those very tough days. Sometimes you can maybe a chuckle, and sometimes a really good belly laugh. And this is a practice a dear colleague taught me. Every morning when I wake up, I inhale blessings and exhale gratitude. Gratitude is very healthy. The data shows that people that are grateful have less trouble with dementia, all kinds of other chronic diseases. So every morning, I think it's really a good idea, because you all have blessings in one way, shape, or another, is inhale blessings and exhale gratitude. And as Kamal mentioned, I encourage you to join the Dr. Rosita Long Mini Medical School on Healthy Aging for the public at JABSOM. I started this in 2014 and directed it, and now I have a wonderful person serving as director, Dr. Masaki. But we have a lot of fun there, and we learn a lot. And it's to keep everybody healthy as they age, because it is a very natural process, and we want to do it well. Mahalo.
Thank you, Virginia and Colette, for wonderful presentations. So for our audience, We would love to answer your questions. If you could please type them into the chat box, and I'll moderate them for our speakers. But while we're waiting for questions, let me ask Colette a couple of issues. So, can you comment a little bit on caregiving? And, we see in both, for both children as well as for our older population, in general, there tend to be more caregivers who are women. Mm-hmm. In fact, in our research study, we found a lot of wives were caregivers, and then daughters were the next, and then daughters-in-law were the next, more so than the sons. Can you comment a little bit on that?
Sure. Thank you. That's a great point. As I said earlier, I think caregiving is wonderful. None of us want to live in a society where we don't care for each other. The problem is when it impacts one's health and one's economic status. Now, men and women are caregivers, of course, but women are the majority of caregivers in every race and ethnic group. Women are the major caregivers for young children, for older adults, whether it's their parents, if they have a spouse, the parents of their spouse. Women are also the major caregivers in terms of nursing and also paraprofessional help, nurses' aides, all of the wonderful home health care aides that have been out there during COVID, taking care of frail older people. And unfortunately, they do so with very low incomes. So you're looking at caregiving, it's either not paid or it's very underpaid. And all of that really impacts people's lives. Now, again, I just really want to emphasize that caregiving is a good thing, but it has to be more, there has to be more gender proportion. And we also have to really acknowledge that it's a really important job to care for others. And whether you work in a child care, an adult daycare, an assisted living, a nursing home, wherever it is, that person really should not be poor. That person should really be making an adequate and even better than adequate income, because caregiving, again, is a very, very important thing.
Thanks, Colette. You're right. It is so difficult to do, especially some of the physical requirements, of moving people and that kind of thing. And many of our nurses' aides, for example, have 2 jobs because they need 2 jobs to survive. Right. And it's sad that they can't just rely on one income, and have 1 job.
That's right.
Virginia, you mentioned a little bit about laughter and, the whole social aspects of old age. Could you comment a little bit about the pandemic and the effects that it's had on our older population?
Well, as a virologist, it's been disappointing, of course, to see the huge impact it's had. And particularly on older people, because they're more at risk. And so they've had to confine themselves more and withdraw from social interactions. And, a lot of us, a lot more people are using Zoom and the tools that we have to see each other, but nothing substitutes for the hugs and the real hugs and particularly in Hawaii, because we do that a lot. And so it has been a real struggle, I think, for many older people, and particularly if they were in assisted living or nursing homes, because they got isolated. And so we're hopeful that if people would take their vaccines, which I certainly advocate for, we get to a point where we can have some semblance of normalcy again, and be able to have that social interaction, because social interaction is just critically important for people. It stimulates your brain. You have to talk and interact with people. So you're moving, you're getting up, you're doing things. Sometimes you're having a healthy meal, which is good. Sometimes you eat chocolate like I do. But it really has had a tremendous impact, and the majority of lives lost have been in the older population. Because that list of diseases, every time they say, well, they had underlying conditions. Most people over 65 do. And some people in 30 do. So, it really took a huge toll in life, and also the isolation issues. So I'm hopeful that if people get vaccinated and we can get back to having those interactions in person, it would be a delight for everyone. But I think particularly for the older population, I know they've learned to deal with it because many people now taking lessons on different ways to communicate, and that's important. But we just took a trip to the mainland, and the purpose was to see family and friends that we love and enjoy and get all those hugs.
Yeah, you said it. I haven't been able to visit my mom, who's 89 and who lives in India, and India basically has canceled all visas. So even if I want to go, I can't go right now. And I talk to her every day, but it's not the same thing. I completely agree. I hope soon. There is a question.
It's really important. We talk about different things, physical activity to keep you going and social interaction. They are really important for your health and well-being.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed because since the pandemic, I've been working at home more. And I noticed I was so sedentary suddenly. Even when I wasn't officially exercising, just walking back and forth to places at work, I would get in a lot of steps. Often I'd get in 5,000, 8,000 steps just from working. So I bought one of those little bicycle things that I do under my desk. And I don't do it as often as I should, but I'm trying.
Well, I think one thing you mentioned, the pedometers.
Yes.
People that often don't realize that the 10,000 steps came because the Japanese developed a pedometer and its name was 10,000 steps. That's not really what you have to do. I think people get overwhelmed by saying I have to do 10,000 steps, that's 5 miles. But try to do a little bit more each day and keep it, then try to get to a balance where you're at least moving 30 minutes a day. Even if you're getting up and down a chair, doing all kinds of things, there are all kinds of ways you can integrate some exercise, even when we're not going out as much as we did. And we're sitting on Zoom a good bit more.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So there's a question in the chat box. Could you talk a bit about geriatricians? Should everyone switch from their internist to a geriatrician at a certain age for more specialized care? This is one of my favorite questions. It's a wonderful question. So let me tell you this. In an ideal world, if we had enough geriatricians, my answer would be a resounding yes. That at 65, everybody should switch to a geriatrician, just like most children are taken care of by a pediatrician. However, because we have such a shortage, because of that, I actually don't recommend it. Hawaii has less of a shortage than some other states. And that's because our medical school offers a wonderful fellowship program, one of the larger fellowships in the country. So we have over 200 graduates now of our fellowship program, many of whom have chosen to stay in Hawaii. It's still way too little bit for our population. And so because of the shortage, most of our geriatricians serve as consultants. And so if your primary care doctor notices a problem where they feel like you'll benefit from a geriatrician, that's when they'll usually refer you to a geriatrician. So only for that reason, I do not recommend that people switch to a geriatrician at a certain age. I do want to comment on JABSOM. Our medical school has a department of geriatric medicine. We were only the 4th in the country to have that, by the way. And even to this day, there are only about 7 departments of geriatric medicine in medical schools all around the country. And I really have to thank our dean and our school's leadership for recognizing how important this field is and by giving us official department status. At JABSOM, every single medical student, regardless of what specialty they go into, has to do 4 weeks of geriatrics and palliative care training with us in their 4th year. Again, you think that would be true of every medical school. The vast majority do not have that requirement. So Hawaii is really kind of ahead of the curve in that way. I'm really happy about that. Let me ask this question for our other 2 speakers. Thanks for the wonderful information. Could you let me know if there's been much study on why life expectancy of Chinese and Japanese women is so much higher than other groups? Is it primarily diet or other lifestyle habits? Colette or Virginia, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, you did the Kuakini study. You probably compared them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we actually found that it's a little bit of both. There is a genetic factor. We did find what we call a longevity gene. And Actually, the Kokini study was the first one to find it.
Mhm.
It's called the FOXO3 gene. And there's a good version and a not so good version. And if you have the good version, you are much more likely to have longevity. So usually these are long-lived families. So, people whose parents and grandparents and brothers and sisters live to extreme old age, you are much more likely to live to extreme old age. But what we found is it's not just the gene, it's also the healthy habits that you have. So if you don't smoke, if you exercise, if you're not obese throughout your life, if you eat a nutritionally balanced diet, all of those things contribute towards your longevity as well. So it is a little bit of genetics, but also a little bit of our environmental factors, including our diet.
Well, they live in family units that offer social support and encouragement too, and that often makes a difference.
That
Right.
makes a huge difference. You're absolutely right. Colette, you had a comment?
Well, I would just add to, we can't forget the importance of income either and economic status, that I think the relationship between poor income and poor health has been very firmly established. So yes, income doesn't make you deliriously happy with everything in your life, but having no income certainly puts you at more risk for a shorter life and poor health.
Certainly. And we know that from populations all over the world that there are health disparities related to poverty, basically.
That's right.
Let me see if there are any other questions in the chat box. Audience, please type in your questions. We have very talented speakers who can address some of your questions for you. Virginia, can you tell us a little bit about some of your hobbies? I know you like to throw the javelin. How did you get into that?
Yeah, I do throw the javelin. I learned early on that people are nice to you if you carry a big sharp stick. But it actually, it happened because my husband's a track official here in Hawaii. And he said, well, there aren't many older women out in the masters group, that's above 50, participating. So I think you could do it. So I said, well, I don't run or jump that well, so I think I'll throw. And our younger son was all-American decathlete. He was very good in the javelin. So I chose the javelin, hoping it was genetics, that he'd gotten that from me. And he started me off in his front yard with a cut-off broomstick, throwing it and trying to learn how to do it. And he said, well, Mother, you also have to develop a primal scream. And he says, but keep it short because your javelin does not stay in the air very long. So I competed and I won several gold medals in Hawaii, became the Hawaii champion. I do have to confess that often I was the only one in my age group, which helped. And then I wanted to form a group. So I got a group of seniors together. There are 5 of us, and we're called the Jazzy Javeliers. And we went to the National Senior Games and competed. And our goals were to have a lot of fun and not be last. And so far, so good.
That's wonderful. How about you, Colette? Do you do anything for fun that keeps you healthy?
Well, I'm a member of a exercise club, and that's great fun. And it's great fun because they're senior classes. And sometimes, if I'm honest, I confess to thinking, why am I in this class? but I'm in the class, and it's really, really great fun. I have old friends, so I agree with Dr. Hinshaw how important friendships are. And I have old friends that I walk with. And of course, I'm a cliche. I have a grandson that I just adore and love spending time with him. But I'm, again, I think as we've been talking, the importance of gratitude, I feel tremendously grateful. I have a wonderful husband, a wonderful family, and I'm very grateful for everything in my life. And you would wish that everyone would have that as they get older.
Oh, absolutely. We have to be grateful, particularly also during this pandemic, right? Mm-hmm. It made me think too about, you see on TV, so many people suffering. This is before the vaccine even came out. Mm-hmm. So many people, even young people, contracting COVID, having deaths in their families. So just having that gratitude I think is really important. One of our audience has a comment. She's a co-founder of a healthcare startup that's focused on geriatric populations, integrating wearables, AI. So can you recommend community-based resources that can help? Usually when people ask about community support, there are two places where I recommend routinely. So if it's for memory type of issues, the Alzheimer's Association, the local chapter, is absolutely wonderful. We do a lot of things together with them actually to educate the public and to educate healthcare professionals. So I really recommend them if it's a memory type of issue. And then the Department of Health, the Executive Office on Aging, has offices on every island and can provide really wonderful resources. And then there are so many community programs, Catholic Charities. There's so many other programs that are out there. Papa Kolea in the Hawaiian homesteads has a senior program. So I really recommend to people to stay engaged with those. Many of these provide socialization. Yes, during COVID, it's now virtual, but still, they provide a really good social network and even a care network, and can refer people to resources if they have health needs. So I really recommend.
I would add that I think you be glad that you live in Hawaii,
Yes.
because there's actually a lot more respect for kapuna here because of the Native Hawaiian and Asian cultures. And that's really important. If you go to some other states, you can learn pretty quickly that those negative stereotypes, that's all you hear. And here, there's a lot of concern and caring about and respect for kapuna, and that's really important.
I grew up in India, Virginia, and we grew up in a multi-generational household. I grew up with my grandparents, and there, that's the norm, is to have multiple generations in the home. It's not considered unusual, actually, and the elderly are really revered, and I think you carry that with you for the rest of your life, basically. Okay, we have a couple more minutes if people have any last minute questions. I don't think I see any more questions in the chat box.
I have one.
Oh,
Could you just describe the program of the mini-med school? I mean, what actually takes place there?
sure. I'll let Virginia start it off because she was the founder of this program from 2014. Virginia, could you talk about it a little bit?
Sure, it's a great program. It's for the public and it's free. And it's to help people get good information and current information about what they can do to stay healthy as they age. And it's open to any age, but typically we have 50 and over people thinking about what they need to be doing for their aging. And it's like Kamal said, it meets 5 Saturdays in a row, 2 lectures and often an option, and a social time typically. Right now it's on Zoom because of COVID, but hopefully someday back in person. But it's kind of hit a sweet spot because there are a lot of lifelong learners here and they want to do the best they can. And so it's focused on what they can do and then also what help is available when it's beyond what they can do. But it's to encourage healthy aging at every stage of your life.
The motto of this program is Seniors Rock.
Yeah.
We've kept the same motto, Virginia.
Oh, good.
And laughter is a really important factor in healthy anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so we try and incorporate some humor in our talks, even though sometimes it might be difficult. I remember doing a talk on depression. It was very hard to incorporate humor in it, but I managed to try a little bit anyway. And then there is a question in the chat box, is any of the Healthy Aging Mini Medical School on Zoom or is it in person? Right now, all of it is on Zoom. We had hoped, we did it on Zoom last fall and last spring. And then this fall, we had hoped that it could be a hybrid, having a few people in person and a few people on Zoom. And then, of course, we had the surge. And at this point, we just decided until this pandemic is over, it's too unpredictable, when surges are going to hit. So we've just decided to be safe rather than sorry. So it's all on Zoom.
Mhm.
Our fall session is ending right now. Our last session will be this coming Saturday, so it's too late to enroll for that. But our spring session will be coming up. It's starting in mid-February of 2022. All new topics, all new speakers. So please do visit the website. And if you'd like to send an email, I had it on my slides, Roger. I don't know how to get that information to people, but I did have it on one of my slides.
If they just
The
type in
email.
JAPSOM Mini Med, it'll come up.
Yes.
That's how I found you.
Okay. And you're welcome to send an email if you'd like to be put on the invitation list for the spring.
Oh, well, we've come to the time to close. I really want to thank you, ladies, for a really fascinating discussion. A lot of very valuable information, most of which I've ignored most of my life. But it was really valuable to have it. And it's for attendees, for you and for anyone who's missed this that you know would profit from it. It will be available shortly on the Better Tomorrow Speaker Series YouTube channel. And then we will also edit this session into highlights, which will be available on our website for at least a year. So thank you very much, panel. I really enjoyed it. Aloha.
Aloha.
Thank you, audience. Thank you, Colette and Virginia. And thank you, Roger, for inviting us, and Colin for your help with our tech. We really appreciate it.
Yes, aloha.
Good night, everyone. Bye-bye.